Okay, guys. Some of you may know who these characters are. Anybody want to identify them? It's Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert. In the early 70s, about the time I met them as an undergrad at MIT, they advertised a project they were looking for student helpers on, and I foolishly heard all about it and decided not to get involved. So, as some of you know, a couple years before that, they published a book called Perceptrons, which has often been blamed for the winter of AI around connectionist and neural strategies because they attempted to prove the inability of some neural networks to accomplish basic reasoning tasks. Of course, we now know that turned out to be solvable with scale. They had a project at MIT in the AI lab, which was very much based on what we would now call good old-fashioned AI, symbolic, hierarchical control structures, etc. That has now often seen as kind of old hat and old-fashioned. Seymour was famously the developer of the Logo programming language. This is in front of one of his famous turtles that some of us learned to program with in Logo. But I want to focus on a book that Marvin wrote called Society of Mind, which I think develops the relatively obvious idea that mentality is composed of lots of different subsystems. It's not a single unified, perfect principle, as he says. It's a variety of modules that came up through evolution, kind of a form of evolutionary bricolage. And how does that work when it comes to legal applications? It is useful to contextualize this, recognizing that we are fundamentally social, both physically in terms of all the different pieces of our body and the other organisms that live in us, and our minds. Just as Marvin said, we're composed of lots of sub entities. So we contain multitudes, but we also live within multitudes. And law itself is a socially produced way of regulating social behavior. So we should look to sociology, recognize it's not just us as humans, but animals live in social networks and have complex interactions with each other. And these three fundamental phenomena of society, intelligence, and law exist in structures of reciprocal causality, right? So society is really not imaginable without some form of intelligence in its members. And intelligence, in turn, is very much, I think, socially produced by our interactions with other smart, intelligent beings we learn ourselves. Same thing with law. Society kind of depends upon law to organize itself, but law requires societies to have an object upon which to act. So I want to talk very quickly about two aspects. One is looking inward. What are the inner societies of us and our new artificial helpmates? And then in a bit, the outer society of the social environments we live in that have this combinations of people and machines. So one of the questions I think Samuel has already touched on is this, to what extent can we do things we want to do in law with large language models without having some form of symbolic scaffolding? We now talk about neurosymbolic systems, but how do we accomplish the things I've got bulleted here? Generating arguments, critiquing arguments, eliciting and telling stories, handling ambiguity, analogies, metaphor, facilitating genuine human choices which depend upon human cares and concerns that can't be resolved algorithmically or by looking up something in a database. And how do we handle planning and strategy, strategic interaction with fellow humans and increasingly our new machines? So I think all these things require some form of theory and some explicit world model. There are lots of attributes that we may want to inject into our artificial devices that would get us to some of those tasks, some of those skills. My two favorites are at the bottom, which are curiosity and humility. How do we build machines that actually are curious about us when they're interacting with us and the details of our circumstances, and how can they be humble by recognizing their limitations and their flaws? Obviously, when we're trying to construct artificial devices, there's plenty of human characteristics and phenomena we really don't want to bring along with it. So it's good to be aware of those. I put out the AI and Law Journal, which is one of my favorite publications, because for the last 30 some years, a bunch of scholars and practitioners have been examining all these themes as they relate to the agenda of building intelligent machines. And this, as some of you may know, is a wheel of lawyer activities and attributes and skills and behaviors that has been gathered by the International Association for the Advancement of Law under their Foundations project. So it kind of demonstrates to us how much work we have to do if we hope to build an artificial lawyer or build machines that are useful in handling legal work. I find it useful to think about two use cases or major roles that an intelligent machine can play in relation to law. On the left, of course, is where the machine is substituting for a lawyer by being a helper to a consumer. On the right is the role of being a colleague, a professional colleague, augmenting human expertise. There are other potential circles, and I think the overlap here is understated in my diagram because nearly everything you need to be an effective substitute for a lawyer is also what you need to be an augmentative lawyer and vice versa. So jumping to the outer society, here again, the idea is that we are increasingly living in networks of humans and intelligent machines. What does that mean for us as practitioners? We're not at the stage where we're considering admitting artificial lawyers into our law societies. We're not sure how to handle character and fitness when it comes to a virtual device. But there are plenty of ways in which the AI world, as part of our own workplace, will accelerate, I think, our collective intelligence. And vice versa, I think the interaction of artificial devices with us as lawyers and practitioners and professionals will be a kind of experiential education for the devices themselves. So hopefully we'll be on a positive spiral of increasing intelligence and hopefully empathy and other characteristics. Lots of questions raised by this. What do we want to play? What kind of role do we want to play as humans with these new artificial helpmates? Do we want to be a teacher of them and be taught by them? Or do we want to be essentially a puppeteer and manage them as a way of speaking for us when we're not around? I like this image, again, quickly generated by one of our Gen AI tools. But what happens when we have not just one or two sources of legal expertise and knowledge that we may pay for on a subscription, but we have a dozen or more forms of intelligence on tap? How do we choose? How do we mix them? How do we manage this new world of artificial assistance? A couple things I've written in this area over the last few years. I'll leave this here, but I encourage you to read. I especially like my Dancing with Cognitive Exoskeletons piece. It's very short. But the idea is that as we equip ourselves as professionals with increasingly smart robotic carapaces, virtual carapaces, how does that affect our ability to interact with colleagues, clients, counterparties, etc.? And what is this phenomenology of interacting with machines in the legal workplace? So two last slides. One is this idea of living with this brooding omnipresence of artificial and legal intelligences. What does that mean for us? On the one hand, it gives us an opportunity to really use this new form of intelligence and knowledgeability to expand access to justice and wellness to the many people around the world who have no access to either. But we really are still in the most early stages in terms of the quality of our systems, the support we get in our educational institutions, and the readiness of our regulatory environments to manage it. I'm especially interested in how we educate, quote, mindful practitioners in this world of new minds competing for our attention and our assistance. One thing, like Andy said earlier, is the value of getting students involved in trying to imagine and build these legal minds. Obviously, there's new skills needed. How do you manage? How do you build with them? What do you delegate to them? Under what circumstances? And how will you advise people who aren't clients, who need legal help, about which apps, if any, help them deal with their circumstances and when they might be better served if they can afford it by a professional or a specialist? So wrapping up, it seems clear that these artificial personalities are going to need a whole village of new competencies to be adequately useful to us in both modes, as both a substitute and as an augmenter. Legal work itself is going to increasingly involve managing all these new friends and colleagues. Even maybe we'll discover we need a general contractor agent that'll handle managing all the other agents. But leave you with this thought, which is this all poses new opportunities, I think, for reflection. What do we actually know? What do we think? How do we think as lawyers? What makes us different from machines? What can they do that we can't or may never be able to do? What can we do that machines can't yet do? And what is our vision of excellence in lawyering? How do we achieve it? And will we still be able to achieve it when most of the work is being done by machine? What does that mean for our training and education of new entrants into our profession? Thank you.